Welcome to today's episode of the Psychedelic Mom podcast. I'm here today with Kevin Cannella, who is a mystic at heart, a psychotherapist by trade, an entrepreneur by calling, and a psychonaut in spirit. Kevin is the co-founder and executive director of Thank You Life, which is a beautiful organization. It's a 501c3 nonprofit organization that exists to expand the access of psychedelic therapy by eliminating financial barriers for treatment, which is so needed in this space. So welcome here today. I'm so happy to have you here.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So Thank You Life. Let's go right into this organization and the mission of Thank You Life.
Yeah. Our mission is really oriented around access and health equity. I think what a lot of us saw in this space early on, and, how I got into this space as a therapist and, was doing some ketamine work in my private practice and saw that this was available to people who had the resources to pay for something that was decently expensive. Um, in terms of access and health equity, when I say we, I just mean like me and a lot of my colleagues when I was in Boulder, Colorado, were talking about how we wished this was available for more people. And what I found was so many of the therapists around me, were really in this work for heart reasons and really had a desire to work with everyone. And that just wasn't quite possible. And, from the therapist point of view, there's a limit to how much kind of pro bono and sliding scale that people can do.
Mm-hmm.
And therapists, the need outweighs, a therapist's capacity to do sliding scale and do pro bono work. And
Right.
so there's this real clear gap and need for something. And, I think that can be filled through a lot of different things from, say, insurance, employee benefits, something like Anthea is doing, or something like we're doing, where it's just a straight up fund for anyone to apply to who might not be able to pay for this themselves.
So I think a lot of times one of the things that'd be nice to talk about, because it's hard to even understand why the cost is what it is. Sometimes it's like, why would it cost so much? Can you kind of describe from a therapist point of view actually what's involved and why the expense of these therapies does cost so much?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, to take ketamine, for instance, as the main sort of psychedelic therapy that's legal here, ketamine is no longer patented. And so, it's a generic pharmaceutical. It's super cheap. What ends up costing a lot is the time of the therapist and the time of a psychiatrist or psychiatric nurse practitioner to, do the evals at the beginning. And so I think on one hand, the cheapest way that we can do this is through a therapist in private practice. But that, could still easily be between $3,000 and $5,000 for somebody. A more expensive route is more with a clinic that has perhaps a bit more overhead, maybe because they have a bigger space, and then, liability insurance and these kinds of things. They typically have a much larger overhead, and then you're looking at somewhere between like $5,000 and $10,000 for a whole ketamine treatment.
Yeah. And I think the reason I ask that is because I think sometimes if you don't know about and you've never had a psychedelic experience with whether it's a one-on-one therapist or two-on-one or a team that's looking at the health forms and doing so much prep work and calls before preparing you, it's hard to understand why the cost would be what it is, but it is a lot of time, a lot of expertise that goes into really making sure that the container is safe, the medicine's safe, and the client is held in a way that is going to be the most supportive to that client. And yet, as you mentioned, the medicine itself is not that expensive, you know? So, due to the fact that right now this is the model that we have in our Western model for medicine that's legal, a psychedelic that is not quite a true psychedelic. This is kind of what we have, and what you're trying to do is create more access. Let's talk about the medicine of ketamine itself, because I just mentioned that it's not a classic psychedelic. So
Yeah,
I don't want to throw that out and not have that explained. So can you explain a
totally.
little bit about ketamine?
Yeah, and so, classical psychedelics are things like LSD, psilocybin, DMT, sort of like the main ones, especially the most well-known ones. And so then there's things like MDMA and ketamine, which are not classical psychedelics. And so, ketamine was derived, I think, like in like the 50s. It was actually a derivative of PCP. And so in the medical community, they were trying to make this sort of perfect anesthetic that had these certain qualities. One of the main ones being an anesthetic that didn't depress the respiratory drive. Because
Mm-hmm.
if an anesthetic doesn't depress a respiratory drive, you don't need to intubate the patient. And so they came up with PCP. It had a little too much delirium.
Mm-hmm.
And then they came up with ketamine, which still had some delirium, but not as much. And so it was just safer because, patients would come out of the PCP experience just, having kind of wild hallucinations and these kinds of things. So ketamine was basically similar, but toned down a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yet what we find is because of that sort of delirium experience, what I was saying to you before is like there's this opportunity to have a journey that can be very psychedelic. And either way, just very sort of otherworldly and definitely an experience of an altered state of consciousness that fundamentally can help us get to a similar place that more classical psychedelics can help us get to. And, I think the two main sort of branches of experience, if we just got very general with psychedelics or even something like ketamine, on one hand, it can help us really experience the beauty of life and some of the heights of life and really meaningful experiences of the divine. People describe seeing God and, of course, like whatever that means to them. Often it's not just seeing some sort of figure. It's some sort of experience of the divine. And then it can also really help us get in touch with what we might call our denied feelings, our repressed traumas that continue to shape and affect our lives and result in conditioning and patterning that might not serve us.
Mm-hmm.
And so both of those experiences can be super profound and important for the sort of growth and evolution of the individual.
I love that you're defining these aspects of different psychedelics, and yet also the commonality of the ways in which they support transformation, which is almost these two aspects. And there's probably multiple layers that we could talk to, but you've highlighted two. One is that this experience of something beyond ourselves, something outside of our everyday reality that we perceive on a psychedelic experience that gives us access to parts of ourselves or reality or some other reality, however people look at this, but also the layers of self, the layers of conditioning, the wounds, the core wounds that then are playing out in our lives in ways, as you said, that don't serve us anymore. So it's interesting that somehow ketamine ended up working in this way, because I don't think it was intended to work this way. Ketamine is legal. I just want to have a little bit more clarity on this because I know we're in this really interesting place of legalization, decriminalization of earth medicines and psychedelics. And I know in Colorado and different places, certain things are becoming legalized. And yet it doesn't necessarily mean true legalization on a scale of sovereignty. Anybody can take them, anybody can offer them. I want to understand a little bit on ketamine, this legal piece. Who can serve ketamine? How is right now the structure of legality of ketamine structured in the West?
Yeah, and so at least in the U.S., it's considered a Schedule III substance,
Mm-hmm.
and my understanding. So I'm not a doctor; I'm just a therapist, and so on one hand, I have no prescribing power, so I know a
Mm-hmm.
little bit about this, but not
Mm-hmm.
like 100%. But basically, there's somebody with prescribing power,
Mm-hmm.
often a doctor, psychiatrist, MD, nurse practitioner. In a lot of states, a nurse practitioner can also prescribe. And so the way that it typically happens, whether you're seeing someone like me in private practice or going to a clinic, if you're seeing someone like me, I will send you to a prescriber who will
Mm-hmm.
do a psych eval and
Mm-hmm.
a medical eval on you, and really see if you're a good fit for this sort of treatment.
Mm-hmm.
There's two, I guess, three main routes of administration that is used for ketamine.
Mm-hmm.
Two of them are IV and IM. IM is intramuscular, which is just like a shot in the arm, like in the shoulder or something like this. And those are often done by nurses. Those are often done in clinics. And then there's also sublingual lozenges,
Mm-hmm.
and those are technically self administered. And so
And snorting.
on the streets, yeah. Yes. um, yeah, so if someone's seeing me in private practice, it'll be a lozenge. And so the way that that works is they actually get the prescription. They either pick it up themselves from a compounding
Mm-hmm.
pharmacy or that pharmacy ships it to them. They show up to my office with the ketamine in hand. And, usually I'm working with the psychiatrist to, they ask me to count it, but I'm not allowed to touch it or anything like this.
Mm-hmm.
But they ask me to count it to make sure the person isn't using it, outside of the context that it was
Mm-hmm.
prescribed for, which, I've never really had an issue with. But there's definitely some abuse potential with ketamine.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, in the last couple of years, I think it's really blown up not only um, in the psychedelic space to be used clinically. I think it's also
Mm-hmm.
really kind of blown up in the party scene a bit,
Right.
um, which
Yeah,
is,
because
yeah,
it
just
is one of
unfortunate.
the psychedelics that can be addictive, and many of, or most of the psychedelics are non-addictive. So it does have that
Yeah,
quality. Yeah. So, and
it
one of
does
the
because it,
reasons, the risks that kind of would be nice to highlight here a little bit is, from my understanding, ketamine should never be taken more than a certain amount. Maybe I don't want to put that out there as far as how do you know dosage? Like how often ketamine would be even safe to take?
yeah, I think there's, some things with extended prolonged use with like kidney issues.
Hmm.
I think it can just be tough on the kidneys to
Yeah.
process it. Um, Again, these are things that will get covered in like the medical eval, but
Right.
I mean, in terms of just like street use, I would just stay away from snorting it
Yeah.
and getting it off the streets. Um, on one hand, white powder these days can be really
So
sketchy to just
dangerous.
buy
Yeah.
from somebody, and then it really inhibits motor function, and so it works great if you're doing it ceremonially
Hmm.
or clinically, and
Hmm.
you have the space to lie down, you have someone there to support you,
Hmm.
and there's a really lovely playlist playing, and you
Right.
have an eye mask, you have your whole setup. This is getting to set and setting, which is
Hmm.
always talked about with psychedelics. That's a really lovely space for ketamine, and often the person has no need to get up, maybe 3/4 of the way through, they need to use the bathroom, and their facilitator can help them get to the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
But having those same effects in public, or like at a sort of rave, or even just like at a party, can just be super disorienting for people. And I think this is where people getting into what they call K-holes emerges,
I would think it'd
where
be
they,
dangerous too. I mean, ultimately, for part of that journey, you are not there. And your body is actually so relaxed that you wouldn't really, I don't know, it feels like a really dangerous situation if you were in a full ketamine journey in a space that wasn't safe.
oh, 100%, 100%. Yeah. The people often have experiences of leaving their body,
Mm-hmm.
which is really profound and transformational
Mm-hmm.
when they're in a safe setting.
Yeah.
And yeah, super dangerous and unsafe and potentially traumatic
Mm-hmm.
uh, when they're not in that sort of set and setting.
We just talked a little bit about set and setting. And so you're a psychotherapist who is working with this medicine. And from the first line of my intro, a mystic at heart. So I'd love to know, are you serving this kind of in a ceremonial / therapeutic way? Yeah, I'd love to know how you serve this medicine. I'm also serving this medicine, and that's a little bit of my approach. So I'm curious of your approach.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, so on one hand, as I've been doing the Thank You Life work, I
Mm-hmm.
haven't been doing a ton of ketamine in my private practice
Mm-hmm.
of recent. Um, I would say, in some ways, I really come from a lot of more of a ceremony background
Mm-hmm.
with, I was mentioning to you a lot of ayahuasca through my 20s, and that was all in that sort of ceremony space. One thing is that I'm still pretty sensitive to is because I'm doing this as a therapist with the public, that I don't want to, put there's like a secular component to it where I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
like push any sort of particular spiritual
Mm-hmm.
bent onto people.
Mm-hmm.
So mainly my approach is to this is when they're coming to see me in private practice. I'll see them at least 4 times, really just doing one-on-one 1 hour therapy. And this really allows me and them to get to know one another, begin to build that rapport. And they also begin to get a sense of how I work.
Mm-hmm.
I would say mainly with, a more somatic angle that I can bring in, and then also with parts work. Uh, Two really beautiful methodologies that are so powerful.
So powerful.
They work so well with psychedelics as
Yeah.
well. And we don't want someone to not have a sense of what those kind of methodologies are,
Mm-hmm.
um, and be experiencing them for the first time in a psychedelic experience. It could,
Definitely.
again, just be
Yeah.
very disorienting. Um,
I just want to pause there for a second
mhm.
because for someone who is unfamiliar with what somatic experiencing or somatic inquiry is, I've definitely talked about it a lot on my podcast because it's something, those two modalities are exactly the modalities that I use because, like you said, they work so beautifully. But somatic inquiry would be the opportunity to go into your body, really sense what's there in your body, often with your eyes closed. The body acts as kind of the deep psyche, the deep unconscious, subconscious. And it's just a method where a therapist can help guide you into your body to see what's there, what memories are there, what sensations are there. And then parts work was started by Dick Schwartz. Yes,
Yeah, it's a Gestalt method, and
Gestalt.
then IFS, internal family systems, is a specific type of parts work that Dick
Hmm.
Schwartz brought forth. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
And that is just really the idea that each of us has many parts within us, our child parts, protector parts, that really are playing out in our day to day lives unconsciously. And those two modalities together with psychedelics is really a beautiful combination. And you're right. I think it's so beautiful that you're bringing people in. I think that preparation work a lot of times in the psychedelic space can be too short and bringing
Yeah,
people in and really familiarizing them with what might come up in the ceremony by using these two modalities before they even take a psychedelic is key.
100%, 100%. Yeah, I think it's just another thing about ketamine. There's so many different ways to do this, and that's what I've been
Mhm.
seeing with Thank You Life. There's over 50 different clinics that we partner with all over the U.S. now,
Wow.
and everyone's doing it in a slightly different way.
Wow.
Um, and that, like, you know, as far as we can tell, they're all having a lot of success, which is also just the interesting thing.
Hmm.
And so, I know of like a place in California that we've sent people with tremendous results, and they do 90-minute intermuscular sessions. Um, they'll do 8 sessions over 4 weeks or so, and all the prep and integration happens within that 90 minutes.
Hmm.
Um, and then, on the other side of the spectrum, you have what I was doing, which is very similar to what my supervisor was doing,
Hmm.
which is, at least 4 sessions of one-on-one therapy. And then this prolonged, 5 to 25 ketamine sessions over however long. I mean, typically once every other week.
Hmm.
Um, but this is someone who, it's like I'm doing ketamine with my therapist, and
Right.
it's a like ongoing sort of process, much different than I have a therapist and then I go to a clinic for this kind of short,
Mm.
discrete
Hmm.
time.
And just for anybody who doesn't know, too, ketamine is a short acting experience compared to MDMA or psilocybin or LSD or iboga or some of the other psychedelics, lasting
Yeah.
about 45 minutes to an hour and a half. What would you say?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And so intermuscular, it's more like, 45 minutes.
Hmm.
And then the lozenge sublingual method can be more like an hour and a half.
Hmm.
And, with both of them with some lingering effects. It's not like you're going to be stone sober when
Right.
you emerge out of that, but, you'll be coming back and be a little kind of woozy, which
Hmm.
is honestly awesome. Also a really great opportunity to do some of this parts work
Hmm.
specifically.
Hmm.
Often people will kind of really be eyes closed in their own journey,
Hmm.
kind of, and with lozenges, say, yeah, like an hour and a half, they begin to speak a bit more and come out of that journey, and then they get to share what happened and still be in a very like open, like visionary sort of space for another, half hour to an hour
Hmm.
that um, can just be a really potent time to, yeah, do some of this work, access some of these exiles or hurt child parts,
Hmm.
and I think so. I think one reason that psychedelics is so needed in a society like ours is that we just have a lot of fucking repression
Totally.
and a
It's
lot of,
layers and layers and layers.
yeah, and a lot of defenses
Hmm.
to break through. And so I think that's often why people in the West will describe a psychedelic experience as 10 years of therapy in a night,
Right.
because they actually got to break through those layers that when it's just their conscious mind online might be virtually impossible,
Right.
unless they have a extremely skilled therapist to
Right.
facilitate that.
Yeah. Because even the protector parts can be very tricky. Like for you as yourself to figure out when a protector part is at play, having a therapist who's kind of um, not only using intuition, but real skill at watching is super helpful. Yeah. Before we get into the data, because you just
Hmm.
mentioned that you talked about this one company in California that was seeing incredible results. I'd love to get to the data of what you're seeing. I kind of want to just briefly pause and talk a little bit about um, who this is helpful for. Who would be a candidate for ketamine? And why would you choose ketamine over the other psychedelics besides it being
Mm.
legal?
Yeah, great question. I think that is one of the biggest reasons to choose
Hmm.
it.
Yeah.
Um, I think in general, it's also cheaper from what I can gather. Definitely safer because it's all above board. It's also just a great place to start. I'll
That's
say a
kind
couple.
of, I wanted you to say a little bit about that, even as compared to a psilocybin journey
For
or
sure.
or ayahuasca journey, kind of the different quality vibration of this medicine compared to some of the others.
Totally. And then I'll also say for depression, it's just
Mm-hmm.
extremely great for depression. I would say the kind of main things here is like anxiety, depression, PTSD, can be great for substance use, especially alcohol. Often there's this quality to the experience that people find quite pleasurable. And I think that is so, it's described as analgesic. I think that's, and basically one means like anti-pain and one means anti-anxiety. And so,
How about just that for society?
yeah,
Just for a moment
yeah,
in time to just be held in a space where your anxiety melts away and your pain melts away. That's pretty wild. Just to have a relief.
yes. And that is a huge piece to, I think, why it's so good with treatment-resistant depression.
Mm-hmm.
What we often say is that it gives exactly what you just said, like a 2 hour relief. And I mean, imagine being super depressed for months on end, and then just to get a 2 hour relief where things feel good, things feel really spacious often,
Mm-hmm.
and people just have a completely different outlook on themselves and their lives and what's going on. And even though the most potent piece of that may only last a couple hours, it still is profound to just lift somebody out of
Mm-hmm.
their state for even just that long. And
No, just out
um,
of curiosity about that, because it was, as you said, an aesthetic, right? So when we are depressed or anxious, and particularly like anxiety, or there's some fight, flight, fear, leave response going on, the whole physiology of a person is on high alert, is on like survival. What is ketamine doing to that system? Is it hitting certain receptors in the brain, or is it working on the vagus nerve? What's happening?
yeah,
You don't know.
I don't know exactly about how it works on the vagus nerve.
Mm.
I believe it works a lot with the GABA
Mhm.
receptors in our brain. Um, and basically, it's known to help regulate
Mhm.
all of the major um, neurotransmitter systems of the brain. So
Mhm.
the serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin,
Mhm.
the cannabinoid receptors, GABA, um, and it's often described as like a bit of a reset for the brain.
Mhm. Mhm.
I would say overall, because of this kind of anti-anxiety effect, it does have a calming effect to the nervous system, helping the nervous system go into a more parasympathetic state, calm down. And that's not always true.
Right.
As we're
Mhm.
talking about, one of the aspects of this is to bring up repressed feelings, repressed memories. And so on one hand, I would say that's often the case, that it's just helping the body regulate.
Mhm.
It's also used in a way where, we might be intentionally helping the system activate to
Mhm.
then, do perhaps a somatic process to help, really work through some of the trauma that's stuck in the body.
Mhm. Okay. So when we were talking about before as a comparative to psilocybin or an ayahuasca, besides legality, shortness of duration, access, affordability, what would you say quality wise when you said it's a great place to start in the
Right.
psychedelic space? Why?
Yeah. Partially because of the duration, for sure. It's not quite as intense of a commitment. And often people can go to work the next day.
Mm-hmm.
I think often it's recommended to at least give yourself a day off if
Mm-hmm.
you're doing something intense like psilocybin or MDMA. Um,
Do you think
and
also because it is a bit of a disassociative versus like psilocybin or ayahuasca, um, when you are going into the shadow material, or if there are repressed emotions or repressed traumas, you're not necessarily stepping into the potential of re-traumatizing or going into them to such a deep level that you may not be ready for?
100%,
Yeah.
100%. And a- again, I think it's very dependent on the person, but in
Mm-hmm.
general, for sure. And that's what I was going to say is like, besides the short duration, it's often quite a pleasurable experience for
Right.
people. Although I know for my own experiences, I am able to turn toward a lot of difficult things, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
difficult emotions that in my everyday life are difficult for me to turn toward or to feel.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is that distance. So I can really, it's a very interesting experience where, on one hand, I feel like I'm deeply feeling what's
Mm-hmm.
there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's enough of this, like, it can almost feel like just like a warm hug, what we would just call resourcing in
Mm-hmm.
um, more therapeutic language. And so MDMA and ketamine provide this sort of resourcing. MDMA is known as this heart opener that people are often just feeling a lot of love, and in that kind of space can turn toward their trauma. Similar to ketamine, um, it's often just quite pleasurable. And so, from this kind of, I think almost the core experience with ketamine, again, often, not always,
Mm-hmm.
is this sort of, oh, all is well,
Mm-hmm.
which to me is actually a very um, enlightened state. I think that can really define, if we look at these different sort of spiritual masters through the years, whether it's a Buddha or a Christ or
Mm-hmm.
whoever, there's this all is well sort of aspect to them looking at the world, even looking at, the horrors and tragedies of the world,
Mm-hmm.
and this kind of understanding that even though there might be disharmony going on outside, that doesn't mean there needs to be disharmony inside my being.
Mm-hmm.
And so ketamine can get us to that kind of, oh, all is well very quickly. And from that place, again, to use this word resourcing, that gives the individual a lot of this resourcing. So from this place of, oh, all is well, I can look at my pain, my unresolved breakup that I went through, or, shit about my childhood that was
Mm-hmm.
so painful and buried that, um, I've barely been scratching at it
Mm-hmm.
through the last 3 years of therapy. And, oh, now I can kind of break through and, just have it almost gives us this courage because there's a safety quality to it.
Yeah. I have to be honest, I was like totally shocked by ketamine. And I hear that. I've interviewed some people. If you haven't heard my interview with, oh gosh, Dr. Edwards, he talks about the benefits of ketamine to youth that are really struggling, and what he was seeing there. But in interviews, I've often been surprised by a similar comment that has been said each time. One was with Rebecca Crone too. She's the founder of Plant Parenthood, and it's kind of like, well, ketamine, no, I have no interest. And then it's kind of like, well, it's legal. Let me try it. Let me see its potential. And then just really blown away by the experience itself, how, as you said, like a warm hug. And it's not for everybody. You could have a experience that isn't like this, but some experience of, as you said, whether it's the all is well or a connection to something that feels like true Buddha nature, Christ consciousness, whatever you want to call it, some experience. And I don't want to like create like a religious dialogue around it. And as you said, like even if we're doing a ceremonial or ritual aspect when we're serving this medicine, it doesn't actually mean religious. It can just be lighting a candle. It can be nature. It can be water. It can be, set in a container that So I don't even mean to use the word Jesus or Buddha, but there is this experience in it that they might actually show up. They've shown up. So I'm only saying it because it's like these beings show up and you're like, what? So I've been very incredibly surprised that I've had some of my most profound experiences on ketamine. That has been a shocker to me.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Same. Yeah, I did not expect it going into it, but yeah, again, talking about those two different places that we can go, and one of them is what we might say is like these transpersonal experiences, where we get information about the way reality works, or people often talk about like, feeling like they're sitting in God's living room, just with this warm, loving presence with them, or being in kind of the furnace of creation. These like kind of metaphorical phrases that, especially to someone who has not had an experience like this, makes no sense.
No.
But it's, I think it's for the people who have.
Yeah, it's interesting too. You just said like sitting in the living room. It kind of for me was both. This last experience I had was like coming back again and again to Earth is a cosmic joke. And for like, it must have been like many lifetimes that I was just like clueless walking around like, why am I back here? Oh, I'm supposed to learn something here. And then the next lifetime, it was like about compassion, but I had to see like all kind of the evils of the world. And then the next layer, I heard it was like I was back again. I was like, are you kidding? I'm back here again. And then there was like some new lesson. But at one point, I was sitting in my family room as a child, and it was so visceral. Like I could feel my teeth before I had braces on my lip, as if I knew at what age I was that I was sitting observing my childhood. And so, as you said, it's kind of like this warm hug, but you can also be there in a way that's so hard to describe. It was like both experiences that we talked about before, kind of the mystical experience that many say is also a reason why the transformations happen in psychedelic experiences, but also that very visceral going back into a moment in time that is so captured in my body, memory, psyche that I wouldn't have access to otherwise. And it just kept going lifetime after lifetime until this final lesson in lifetime. It was fascinating. And who would have thought that that would have come through ketamine?
I love that. And my thought is like, if we could just give that to the world, just a concept like that of like, oh, I've been doing this for many lives, and I make up that there's some sort of meaning in it to see like, oh, I'm here learning things, and not like learning how to do my taxes or something like this. I'm like learning these like soul lessons about how to be, and there's this meaning in like, oh, I actually can take that with me. Like we often.
It was interesting, the last kind of thing. And I knew I kept coming back because it was like the song kept replaying in the journey. I was like, oh my God, this song again? Are you for real? I'm back on Earth. And then the final kind of like, oh, this new song started to play, bizarrely. And this bodhisattva dropped in front of me. And I was like, who are you? And was teaching me the lessons of the bodhisattva and Christ consciousness at once. And it was like, oh, okay. And then like the music kept changing. The music didn't become like the same. It wasn't like revisiting to have to keep coming back. It was fascinating.
Yeah. And I mean, just hearing that these kind of personal experiences, we are just so meaningful for people. And I mean, without them, people can feel very lost and like they don't know what their purpose is here or what's really going on here. But just even one experience like that, even if it just evokes more mystery of like, what the fuck
unknown,
is all of this?
Right.
Yeah.
And one of the things that was really interesting was it was showing me this resonance. It was like a vibration to connect to that was compassion, that was forgiveness, that was love. That was the most fascinating part. And I'd be like, okay, and I'd feel into it. And then it was like, you can always access it through 2 breaths. so weird, but it's like it had me breathe out twice and feel my breath on my upper lip, but also breath. When you breathe out, you hear sound. So sound and sensation. So it was like, is your remembrance. So again, there's the somatic experiencing, right? It's in the body, but it was like, whenever you forget, breathe out twice, feel this breath on your lip, hear the sound of
Mm,
your breath, and come back to the resonance of what is always within you, which is this true nature. And it was like, uh, okay, is there anything else I have to learn besides all of these deep things of humility, compassion, forgiveness? I mean, obviously, I'll spend the rest of my lifetime like becoming that. Um, it's the embodiment of that. But how about, just I was shocked that that was a lesson of ketamine.
mm, mm. Yeah, I love the simplicity and how, I mean, how the somatics can tie it all together. I love
Hmm.
that too.
I'm curious about your path here because I know you had mentioned that at 27, you were really seeking some answers about some core fundamentals about life, abundance and purpose and meaning. And what got you here from that seeking?
Yeah. So during a lot of my 20s, I had the great fortune of spending about 5 years in Hawaii and was work trading on farms a lot and was having really beautiful experiences and deeply found my spiritual community and was able to really dive into a number of different um, streams, we might call them,
Mhm.
of spirituality. A lot of Buddhist, a lot of ayahuasca, a lot of Sufism,
Mhm.
um, and then also like following a spiritual teacher, and that was its own very profound experience. Yet I was still very poor materially. I didn't have any sort of career. I wasn't going after any of that. Um, and I got to this place where, for years we're talking about service, abundance, purpose, and none of those were really activated for me. None of those were actualized in any substantial sort of way. Um, yeah, I could sweep the kitchen floor, and that was about it, and that was frustrating. And I knew there was more potential for me to step into, and so yeah, it really around 27 really found uh, this sense of my time being up in Hawaii, and I left. I left like May 2015 and had this really interesting intention for myself, which was to align my work and my finances
Mm.
and to align both of those with my gifts and talents and my dharma and purpose. And I didn't really know what that was going to be.
Mhm.
And I had a very interesting summer planned out, hopping around what in Hawaii we would call the mainland. Um, and it was ending in Brazil, where I was going to spend a month at an ashram with this spiritual teacher. And I really, after hearing this so much, it was really one of these times where I was really able to let go. So the whole summer, I wasn't like, "Oh, what is it? What am I going to do?"
Mhm.
I really just was present and don't know how, but was just able to enjoy myself, really not give a second thought to what might come next. And when I was down in Brazil, which was really, and that was September that year, and the kind of last stop for the summer is where it all came through. Somebody from Boulder asked me or told me, said, "Hey, you should move to Boulder." And this woman said it 4 times in one conversation to me. And that night I went to meditate in my bed, and my mind was just churning on this idea of Boulder, Colorado, and what I might do there. And the previous year, I'd been hearing a lot about Naropa and
Mhm.
had a roommate who was a good friend of mine, although much older than me. He was 60 at the time. He was my roommate, And he had actually been to Naropa in 1975 for their opening summer seminar.
Mm-hmm.
And this really fascinating synchronistic story in his own life that I heard him tell a couple times. And so Naropa was kind of planted in my mind. And after that conversation with this woman telling me that I should move to Boulder, I very quickly was looking at grad school and therapy. This other random synchronistic piece, a few years prior to all of this, um, I was in some very hippie communities on Maui, and there's a lot of divination cards and tarot cards and angel cards and all the different cards. And there was this one deck that was all about purpose, and I drew these two cards in this one random moment, and two things came up: therapy and massage therapy. Um, and through some other experiences, I had a general sense that those were two possible places to explore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then, to go back to Brazil when all of this was happening, Boulder led me to, thinking about Naropa a lot, and then finding their transpersonal counseling programs. And I've just been hearing a lot about those counseling programs and how experientially based they were, which really resonated with me. I felt like a lot like to distill down what was happening to me on Maui. I would say I got to go experience
Mm-hmm.
what I was looking to experience. I was reading things in books, but it was about actually experiencing things,
Mm-hmm.
doing a lot of 10-day Vipassana retreats where it was, 10 hours of meditation a day. A lot of ayahuasca, which is brutally experiential. um, and so, yeah, the idea of going into some sort of sterile clinical environment and learning academically about the psyche
Mm-hmm.
was moderately interesting to me. But going to, Naropa, this Buddhist inspired school that had a very experientially based program, was right up my alley. And I just had this sense that becoming a therapist would be the vehicle through which I could then find a career.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, that was kind of the first step, and now the opportunity to be the executive director of Thank You Life, and to really um, bring this work to a larger, bring access to like a larger body of people.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Did
it
you
just
feel
feels like
that?
the next step for now.
I mean, it's kind of a silly question because you're here, but did you feel like psychedelics, whether it was ayahuasca or other psychedelics, inspired you to be right where you are? Was there lessons in the medicine that brought you here? Was there like a real healing that you had? You mentioned abundance, and I'm just curious in how things had not actualized in your life. I'm thinking about my own process of healing with the use of earth medicines and psychedelics. It's these almost like three levels. It's the somatic in the body where the density is held of a wound. And then there is the emotion that's held there and repressed there. We talked about the repression. But then there's like the core belief underneath it all. So it was like the wound and where it lives in the body, but then what belief came out of the core wound. And I'm just realizing, in my own kind of core wounds that I had, maybe three big core wounds, and they're very common ones, whether it's like abandonment or unworthiness or whatever they are, that's kind of what medicine began to do. So this abundance wound that you mentioned, did you have something, some core belief around abundance that was a wound that was healed through earth medicines that then kind of changed your life? Or was there another wound healed that kind of made you realize, like, whoa, this is profound and I needed to bring this to more people?
I think for me, the wound was really around a sense of competency.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and part of that showed up as just feeling very childish, feeling like I wasn't being taken seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Not being seen.
yeah. And then this kind of, yeah, like I couldn't quite go out there and touch and feel and grab the world.
Mm. Not quite capable.
Not quite capable.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as much as all of the medicine, meditation, all of these things were doing a lot, working on my kind of inner structure, um, I then had to go like really live it and face it and I mean like like work that competency out in my body like through just being in the world and working through it. And the first version of that was my last year on Maui. Instead of work trading on farms, I had a job and was a paraprofessional or what they call a skills trainer, working with the kids in schools who required a one-on-one, and I was working with like a lot of the behavioral kids, kids that were just having these sort of like emotionally distressing experiences that made it difficult for them to function at school. And so I would kind of hang out with them, and that was still not making good money and barely scraping by, but showing up for work every day. And then, going to grad school was the big sort of transformation. And again, just this, even grad school was this vehicle for me to enter a professional role in a professional life. And then, of course, after graduating, the sort of scraping by financially and like sort of learning through drinking through a fire hose, as they say, trying to become a therapist and also a psychedelic therapist. And luckily I had a lot of psychedelic and just altered state experience by that point. But learning to take another individual through a whole sort of trajectory without medicine, just to and this interesting idea of a therapist of like, someone's going to hang out with me for an hour a week and heal. Like, okay, I better have my shit together and like be on point.
Right.
And really like, it was a responsibility that I really took seriously. And just really had to grow into. And then of course to bring ketamine into that was a lot as well.
So where did this idea of creating Thank You Life, and by the way, I love the title. I actually thought about it this morning. I had this moment and I was like, oh, thank you, life. And I was like, oh, interesting. I'm interviewing Kevin today.
Perfect.
And where did this idea come from?
Yeah. So, my co-founder, Dr. Dan Engel, and myself, and a lot of other people, I think, have had this idea. Just a quick story of Thank You Life with Dan. So 2 things to share. One is, the name for him came from this experience that people often have toward the end of a psychedelic experience, after they've really rummaged through their shit, so to speak.
Thank you.
And then they can finally come to this place of gratitude.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, it can often be the first time that they feel something like that. It's that profound sort of gratitude where they're actually just thanking spirit for life.
Yeah. And for anybody who doesn't know who Dr. Dan Engel is, he's sort of well known in this space. He's a thought leader, a beautiful man. He wrote the book Dose of Hope. He also has the concussion manual, a book on concussion. He was a teacher at Being True to You. I think he's still actually supporting Being True to You. He was a teacher of mine because I went through Being True to You, and then I worked with Dr. Dan one-on-one, and I have an interview with Dr. Dan. It's my 3rd interview on the Psychedelic Mom. So if you have not heard of Dr. Dan and have never heard his wisdom and his beauty, definitely listen to that episode. So I just wanted to give a little Dr. Dan love because he was absolutely instrumental in my life.
Ooh,
yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't realize that you were able to work with him one-on-one. How was that?
Well, it was interesting because I had done Being True to You, and I thought, well, okay, if I'm really going to do this work, why don't I work with the best and see actually how it works? And so, and even the name being true to you is really interesting because it flips on you after some point. Because I was like, oh, I'm going to do this training and I'm going to be a psychedelic, uh, coach, coach. And suddenly I'm in the middle of the program and I'm like, being true to you. Oh. This is really about me. This is
Mm.
really, it was a deeper journey into the ways in which I needed to come into my authentic self. And then when I worked with Dr. Dan one-on-one, there's layers and layers and layers of lessons that I learned from him on those calls. And then the gift is to be able to then pass those forward, honestly. It was
Mm.
a profound experience working with him. He carried so much wisdom. And it was a gift.
Love that.
Yeah. So I'd love to get into the data and also the communities that you are oriented around supporting
Mhm.
getting equal access to.
With Thank You Life, this was really our first year operating. We got our 501c3 this past December, and we're able to do a bit of a fundraising last year, but this was our first real year of operating. And very quickly, we began orienting toward groups,
Mm-hmm.
like group cohorts that we could put through a ketamine protocol.
Mm-hmm.
And on one hand, it made the treatment more cost effective and cheaper, which was great. Allowed us to help more people. And on another hand, it really brought in this community healing aspect. And so I think there's a trade-off where perhaps there's not as much one-on-one time to really go into personal individual traumas. Yet this community aspect I've seen in my own life, and I think specifically with the communities that we're looking to work with, has just been so profound,
Mm-hmm.
so important. And so, yeah, there's three main communities that we're looking to work with that I was telling you about: the BIPOC community, the LGBTQ community, and the veteran community. And I think all three of those communities are really uniquely for their own reasons, benefit a lot from that community aspect. So I'll talk a little bit about a few different groups that we have going on. So we were able to do a pilot group this year with Integrate and this woman, Wilhelmina de Castro, out of San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
And we were able to put 8 people through, almost all of them from the BIPOC and queer communities. And they had tremendous results. And I'll speak a bit about their results in a minute. And a couple other groups that are just really important for us that are launching. One started a couple months ago, and then one is starting now with the work really being rolled out starting in February. There's a Navajo family that we're partnering with Kate Hawk out of Flagstaff, Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
And she's been deeply embedded in the Navajo community there for many years. And there's one particular family that she is close to and is, helping heal a lot of things, a lot of trauma, alcoholism through ketamine.
Mm-hmm.
We're very excited about that initiative and that possibility. And then we also just got funding for a veteran group out of Oregon with Dr. Steve Rosenoke and Rainfall Medicine. We're super excited about that, and that's what we're hoping to have roll out in February. So yeah, that's a bit about our populations, and then I'll just pull up this data real quick and speak to that. So one thing I'll say here is I think we absolutely need a bit more longitudinal data, but this is what we have for now, and it's definitely workable. So at Integrate, we put 8 people through, and the main things that we tracked were their pre and post depression scores, their pre and post anxiety scores, and their pre and post PTSD scores. And the results were just really amazing. The average decrease in their depression scores was like in the 70s,
Wow.
like 70%.
And how soon after did you get that data, and how long after out did you collect that data?
Yes. So it was about a 3-month difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure exactly how quickly after the last session they collected it. I'm not totally sure.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, we were looking at a lot of scores that were indicated moderate depression to severe depression.
Mm-hmm.
And afterwards, there was one person with moderate depression and one person with mild, and the rest of the people were below a 5, which didn't even, it's like below a 5, there's no indication of depression.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, if you look at the percent decrease, 75% decrease, 84% decrease, 89% decrease, 95% decrease. The lowest two people were 45% decrease, 59% decrease.
Wow. Wow.
Those were the people who responded the least.
Wow.
And again, take 45% decrease. That's the person that responded the least. If you compare that to regular mental health treatment, if you tell somebody that you went to therapy for 3 months or started some kind of SSRI, and 3 months later your depression symptoms decreased by 45%, that'd be amazing.
Yeah.
That'd be tremendous. And what I love is that for us, those are the people responding the least. Anxiety, super, super similar things, really similar percent decrease scores. And then, again, like most people had moderate to severe anxiety, and afterwards, most of them had none to minimal.
Wow.
And then PTSD was also super significant. The PTSD percent decrease ranged from 63 to 97%.
Unbelievable.
Percent decreases.
Yeah, I want to follow up later on, just even like a year out.
Yes.
It's fascinating. Amazing.
Yeah, and we want to do 6 months out too. And these people ended in October, so we just need to wait.
Wow. And so how are you raising money for this project that, by the way, like, as you said, so many people have had this thought.
Yeah.
We need more access. People need more access to these medicines. And so, thank you. Thank you, Life. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Dr. Dan, for actually launching this and doing the work. Because I know, starting a nonprofit and then raising money it's a challenge.
It's a lot.
So how are you raising money to support more people and get more access to these medicines?
Yeah. A lot of it at the moment is through large donors who almost 100% of them have had a really profound psychedelic experience themselves. And so they get it. And they often, part of their path has been a realization that, wow, I want other people to be able to have these kinds of experiences that I'm able to afford. I think there's a lot of people in that camp, and I think there's more people falling into that camp every day. And yet it's also a pretty small pool of, wealthy people with psychedelic experience. We're hoping that the data, and we're actually coming out with a short documentary about that group that I was just speaking about. We had the chance to have a video production team follow 3 of those 8 people around and really capture their stories and their healing. So we're really excited about not only the data, but also being able to show the more like emotional, human to human piece of the story. And we're hoping that that can help break through to donors that maybe haven't tried psychedelics yet. I also want to give out a shout out to Dr. Bronners, who for the second year in a row, and the next year will be the third straight year. They're a big supporter of ours and our main corporate sponsor. And yeah, that's something that we're still trying to really break into, that we have room for like 3 or 4 more corporate sponsorships. And we're really looking for the right sort of partner with that. A business who really believes in this and also has the willingness to, take where like this is really brand aligned for them, and it doesn't feel like something too outside of the box for them and their brand. I think Dr. Bronner's is a perfect example there.
Yeah.
Maybe even more hippy dippy than we are in some respects. So we're right up their alley.
You don't look too hippy dippy.
Thank you. Yeah, I cover it up well.
So how could people support you? Is there a way?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'll also mention is, we're looking at like family foundations as well and getting grants from different sorts of foundations. And again, we're just super new, and this is just something we're breaking into. A lot of foundations want, 2 years of a tax return and these kinds of things. So we're just, building all of that out. And then something that I think will really emerge over the next 5 to 10 years is organizations like us receiving from local and state and potentially even federal grants. And, what I think is amazing is that there's a big highlight on mental health and a big highlight on things like health equity. And so those are really great. And I think perhaps there's still a little bit of stigma with psychedelics. And so once we can get over that sort of hump, I think we'll actually be very well positioned to get funding, large amounts of funding from those sorts of places and government. Because ultimately when we talk about, for the individual, this stuff is really expensive, but when we begin looking at it in more of a systems way, this work not only actually helps people heal, which, things like SSRIs and what we might just say is like the standard of care in mental health is typically not actually helping people heal. It's just Band-Aids. And I think we'll find that it can save us as a community tremendous amounts of money to get people treatment that actually helps them heal.
Yeah.
And
well, when you think about it, our society is only as healthy as we are, and the mental health crisis is overwhelming. So clearly something's not going well here. And yeah, it's fascinating to think about the cost. As you said, it's so expensive. And yet what is the cost to society to having so many people that are feeling anxiety and depression and not really having a way to not just mask the anxiety, but actually get to the underlying core. And how would you define health equity?
Yeah, I think that's a big conversation. And I think there's 2 pieces that we're doing that can help with health equity. I think in general, it's this idea that regardless of somebody's position or location, they have access to adequate healthcare and to whatever they need, whether that's good healthy food, clean water, medicine, doctors, mental health treatment, all of these things. And so I often hear psychedelics described as a white and wealthy movement. The most fundamental thing is with that financial piece. We're here to say, let's make it affordable for you. Whoever you are, wherever you are, let's make it affordable for you. And then, I mentioned these 3 particular populations that we're focused on at the moment. I think all of those populations, in their own ways, can just use some extra support in terms of mental health and in terms of really being welcomed into this kind of space.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the biggest things with health equity is cost of different aspects of healthcare and
Mm-hmm.
people not being able to access healthcare because of costs. Another really interesting thing, especially with psychedelics, is um, about having a practitioner from a similar sort of community or identity
Mm-hmm.
as
Mm-hmm.
the client.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
Really
again,
important.
totally. And I think especially with these three communities
Mm-hmm.
that we're speaking about, and so there's a couple different training programs. Polaris Insight Center out of San Francisco is one example where we're sponsoring and helping them. So they have a scholarship program for their trainings,
Mm-hmm.
and you can go on their website and find. They have a page where you can donate through us to them, to Polaris specifically. And there's two different ways to donate to them. One is just for a cap fund that helps fund clients going to Polaris, but the other is for scholarships for trainees. And so these are therapists and psychedelic practitioners who are doing Polaris's training. Yeah, you can check their website out. I believe they're specifically for LGBTQ practitioners and practitioners from the BIPOC communities.
Mm.
Um,
Love that.
I believe Prati is doing the same sort of thing,
Mm-hmm.
finding scholarships specifically for people from these communities. And there's also in Oregon, I believe they're called Alma, and Rebecca Martinez
Mm-hmm.
is the
Mm-hmm.
ED there. Um, she's great. She could be someone really interesting for you to interview. And they have the same thing. They have a training program, and they're really focused on getting a diverse set of practitioners through their training program.
Yeah. Really important for all of us, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for this work that you're doing. It's so needed in this space and so needed in these communities. Yeah, I just like a prayer for the growth of Thank You Life, for
Mm.
all those that you've currently served, for greater and greater access to any of the earth medicines and psychedelics that would support not only the communities that you're highlighting here, but for anybody. And yeah, is there anything else that you'd want to highlight that we didn't get to today?
People can find us at thankyoulife.org. And
Hmm.
if you want to donate, thankyoulife.org/donate. Um, and if you are potentially interested in donating but want a bit more information about who we are and what we do, you can go to our contact page on our website. You can also just email me at kevin@thankyoulife.org. I'm happy to have a conversation with you, um, show you some of our decks, show you what we're up to. And if you want to just follow us on Instagram, thankyoulife_fund. We have some great content coming out, and it's a good way to stay in touch with us. You can also sign up for our newsletter on our website as a nice, simple way to just stay in touch with what we're doing and who we're helping. And yeah, be on the lookout for that short documentary that should be coming out early next year.
Very cool. And you did a really interesting event recently, gathering a lot of musicians, and that was free, wasn't it? Was that free?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just our launch that was on Instagram Live and YouTube
Hmm.
and that kind of thing. And yeah, two different events. Thanks for the reminder. We're doing monthly integration circles, and there's info on our website about those. Just free integration circles for anyone who may have had their own experience and just need some community support around how to process what happened. And we're also doing a handful of fireside chats, also just virtual because our
Hmm.
community is really all over the country at this point. I think that's about it. I just
Hmm.
super appreciate you taking the time. This was super fun. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, me too. Thank you for sharing your story. And honestly, thank you for the work that you're doing. Continue to share your data with us and who's going through. And when this, this cool documentary comes out, let me know. I'd like to feature it.
Awesome. Yes, we will. We'll be in touch about that for
Okay.
sure.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, absolutely.